A single mother walked 6 miles through a freezing November downpour to reach a job interview. A billionaire CEO sat in the heated back seat of his luxury vehicle and tracked her progress, block by block. He did not stop. He did not offer a ride. He did not send his driver to the curb. He simply watched and waited for her to brake. She had no idea the car behind her existed. She had no idea the company she was walking toward was his. She had no idea that by the time she reached those glass doors, soaking wet and shaking, still 9 minutes early, she would force him to look into the mirror and confront a truth he had spent 30 years outrunning. And nothing, for either of them, would ever be the same again. 52-year-old Robert Gray had not built a $4.7 billion international logistics empire by taking people at their word. He built it by watching what they did when they thought no one was grading them. At 6:09 that raw November morning, Robert sat in the rear seat of a black luxury sedan parked on a rain-slicked side street in East Charlotte. The leather was warm to exactly 72 degrees. The air carried the faint, clean scent of cedar and dark roast espresso, the same private label his executive assistant ordered every morning without being asked. His custom charcoal suit cost more than most families in this zip code spent on groceries in a quarter. His watch, a precision timepiece he had purchased for himself after closing his first 9-figure contract, caught the gray light bleeding through the rain-streaked glass. He was alone in the back seat. He was almost always alone. Gray Global Holdings moved freight through 31 states, maintained warehouses in 9 major cities, and operated a fleet whose contracts touched virtually every major retailer in the American Southeast. Robert had started the company at 24 years old with a single leased box truck, a phone that kept losing signal, and a willingness to drive 16 consecutive hours because the alternative was going under. He knew what real labor felt like. He remembered the way cold morning air bit through a thin jacket, the soreness that lived in the shoulders after a double shift, the arithmetic of survival, calculating whether there was enough fuel left in the tank to reach the next pickup. But memory, he had learned, was a liar. It softened everything it touched, sanded down the sharpest edges until the past felt almost noble. He no longer trusted it. 8 years ago, a man named Elliot Marsh had nearly dismantled everything Robert Gray had ever built. Elliot had been his COO, his right hand, the only man inside the organization Robert had called by his first name without any trace of irony. They had built the entire Southeast expansion together, side by side, 14-hour days, strategy calls on Sunday evenings, the kind of working partnership that begins to feel like something closer to brotherhood. Robert had trusted him with access to everything. Then the forensic auditors arrived. 17 shell companies, redirected vendor payments stretching back over 4 years, falsified invoice chains so carefully constructed that 3 separate compliance reviews had missed them entirely. By the time the full scope emerged, Elliot Marsh had quietly siphoned $23 million while sitting 3 offices down the hall, smiling at Robert across the boardroom table every single morning. The financial loss had been devastating. The operational fallout had been brutal, but neither of those things had cost Robert what the betrayal truly cost him: his capacity to believe that loyalty, in any form, was real. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. He said it in board meetings. He said it in exit interviews. He said it to himself every morning before the first meeting of the day, the way some men recite a prayer. Resumes were polished fiction. References were curated performances. Professional credentials were the story people told about themselves when they had full control of the narrative. The only truth Robert Gray respected was behavior. Raw, unscripted, unobserved behavior. The kind that surfaced only when a person believed no one important was watching. That belief was the engine behind his ritual. Robert Gray, billionaire CEO of one of the largest logistics operations in the Southeast, personally attended the field assessment of every final round candidate, regardless of the position, regardless of the salary. The role currently on the table was Regional Operations Coordinator, mid-level, a $54,000 base. Nothing that would merit a mention in any business publication. But the position sat at the nerve center of the company's daily freight movement. And Robert had long since concluded that the truest test of a person's character had nothing to do with how they performed on a stage. It had everything to do with how they moved when no audience existed. His HR director had called the practice invasive. His board had called it unnecessary and eccentric. One senior vice president had suggested, once, carefully, that it constituted a serious liability exposure. Robert had thanked him for the observation and continued the practice without modification. The method was precise. Before every final interview, Robert would have his driver route through the candidate's neighborhood in the early morning hours. Not their doorstep, never that close, just the surrounding area. He would observe how they left, whether they rushed or prepared, whether their movements were frantic or deliberate, whether they relied on someone else or found their own route forward. He never announced himself. He never intervened. He simply watched, and then he decided. His driver, Marcus, had been with him for 9 years. He adjusted the rearview mirror now, without a word, as thick sheets of rain dragged across the windshield, bending the streetlights into long orange ribbons against the dark glass. "Next address, sir." Robert looked down at the file open on his phone. It was thin, deliberately so. Jennifer Thomas, 31, single mother, previous logistics coordination experience at a regional distribution firm, employment gap, 14 months, no personal vehicle listed, emergency contact, a neighbor. On paper, she was the weakest candidate in the pool by a significant margin. A 14-month gap was a gap most hiring managers would not look past. The eviction notation in her background file was the kind of detail that moved a resume quietly to the bottom of the stack. Robert looked at the file without expression. 1847 Caldwell Street, he said, setting down his coffee. Apartment 2C. Marcus pulled into traffic without another word. The wipers beat a steady rhythm. The heater hummed. The rain kept falling. And somewhere across the city, in a borrowed apartment with a banking app, balance of $6.40, and a daughter still sleeping, Jennifer Thomas was already awake, already dressed, already out of options, except one. The Charlotte skyline was invisible behind walls of low cloud. This was not the kind of storm that announced itself. No thunder, no dramatic lightning, no weather alert urgent enough to interrupt programming. This was the other kind, a slow, deliberate, bone-deep November rain that had begun before dawn and showed no intention of relenting. The kind that didn't punish in a single blow. It simply pressed down, steadily, the way exhaustion does when it has been accumulating for months. Marcus navigated the sedan east through a city that shifted its face, block by block. The gleaming glass towers of uptown Charlotte gave way to 4-lane commercial corridors lined with check-cashing storefronts and tire shops with hand-painted signs. Those gave way to 2-lane residential streets where the oak trees grew close to the road and the houses sat behind chain-link fences. Then came the apartment complexes. 3-story brick buildings from the early 90s. Never renovated, metal staircases bolted to exterior walls. Parking lots where the cracked asphalt had given up trying to stay flat. Marcus slowed as they approached Caldwell Street. He pulled to the curb 2 blocks east, beneath a row of trees heavy with water, far enough to be invisible and close enough to see the entrance of 1847 clearly. "Engine off," Robert said. Marcus turned the key. The heater died. Within 30 seconds, cold began seeping in at the window seals. A slow, deliberate reminder that warmth, inside this vehicle, was a constructed thing. A choice, not a constant. Robert did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on the building's front door. At 6:51 a.m., the door opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her early 30s, lean, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, precise bun, despite the hour and the weather. She wore a dark burgundy blazer, well-maintained, pressed, the kind of piece that had been cared for long past the occasion that first warranted it. Dark dress trousers. On her feet, a pair of worn running shoes, white once, now a weathered gray. In her right hand, she carried a black leather shoulder bag, pressed firmly against her body, not hanging from her arm the way you carry a bag on an ordinary morning, but held close to her chest, shielded deliberately from the rain. Robert's eyes went to it immediately. Something inside it mattered. She paused at the top of the exterior stairs and looked up at the sky. Not with surprise, not with despair, just a brief, clear-eyed assessment, a woman taking inventory of a situation she had already accepted. Then she looked east, toward the distant towers of uptown Charlotte, 6 miles away through the rain. She pulled the bag tighter against her chest, and she turned left onto the sidewalk and began to walk. No car, no rideshare, no one walking beside her, just a woman in a dark burgundy suit moving east in the rain, alone, without an umbrella, her running shoes already darkening at the toes. Robert watched her cross the parking lot, step cleanly over a wide puddle without breaking stride, and disappear around the corner onto Decker Boulevard. He counted to 10. The way he always did. Then he opened his mouth. "Follow her," he said quietly. "Maintain distance. She cannot see the car." Marcus looked at him in the rearview mirror. 9 years of driving Robert Gray through pre-dawn city streets, through corporate crises and personal silences, and Marcus had developed a calibrated sense of his employer's emotional register. He could distinguish routine intensity from something different. This morning, something was different. There was an edge in the instruction he could not immediately name. "Yes, sir," Marcus said, and started the engine. The sedan rolled forward, slow and deliberate, headlights dimmed against the gray morning, 2 blocks behind a woman who had no idea she was being watched. Inside the car, the warmth returned in seconds. Heated leather, climate control, glass thick enough to reduce the sound of the rain to a distant whisper, as though the storm outside were something happening to someone else entirely. Robert Gray leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the dark burgundy figure moving steadily through the downpour ahead, and said nothing. He was certain, with the clinical confidence of a man who had run this assessment dozens of times, that he already knew how this morning would end. He was wrong. She made it to the doors, soaking wet, shaking, 9 minutes early, and just before she stepped inside, a window rolled down. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. Like this video if you're already invested. Subscribe because the chapters ahead will wreck you in the best possible way. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every single one. Stay with me. But that certainty, the practiced, armored certainty of a man who had built an empire precisely by refusing to be surprised, would not survive the next 2 hours intact. Because Robert Gray, for all his algorithms and assessments, for all the years he had spent reducing human beings to behavioral data points, had made a single catastrophic miscalculation. He had looked at Jennifer Thomas's file and seen a liability. He had not yet seen Jennifer Thomas. The sedan moved east through the rain, like a shadow that had learned to be patient. Marcus kept 2 full blocks between the car and the woman ahead, close enough that Robert could track the dark burgundy shape of her through the waterlogged morning, far enough that she would have no reason to turn and register the slow crawl of headlights behind her. The wipers moved in their steady, metronomic rhythm. The climate control held its precise 72 degrees. The espresso in Robert's cup had cooled to exactly the temperature he preferred after the first 3 sips, still warm enough to hold, cool enough to think beside. Outside, the dashboard temperature gauge read 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Robert looked at it once. Then he looked back at Jennifer Thomas. She was already past the first corner, moving with the kind of deliberate, ground-eating stride that suggested she had already made peace with the distance ahead. No hesitation in the shoulders, no shortening of the step, just forward motion, steady, unapologetic, through a rain that had not softened by a single degree since she stepped off that staircase. Robert picked up his phone and opened her file. He had read it twice already that morning, but reading a file in a warm office and reading it while watching its subject walk through 38-degree rain were 2 entirely different exercises. He scrolled past her photograph to the employment history. 4 years at Meridian Regional Distribution. Solid performance notations. A lateral promotion in year 3. Then, 14 months ago, a clean stop. No termination record. No misconduct flag, just a date, and then silence where a job title should have been. Below that, the eviction notation. The banking summary his background service had legally surfaced. No assets, no vehicle, no property. Emergency contact listed as a neighbor, first name only. On paper, Jennifer Thomas was the highest risk candidate in a pool of 6 finalists. 2 others held graduate degrees. One carried a direct board referral, the kind that arrived pre-warmed and asked very little of the recipient. Jennifer had arrived through the public portal, cold, with a 1-page cover letter and a resume that made no attempt to disguise what it could not hide. Robert set the phone down. He watched her walk. She had turned south onto Monroe Road, which meant the wind had shifted angle, a flat, driving pressure that pushed the rain sideways against her face and forced a constant lean into her stride, the way a person leans into something they have decided to move through rather than wait out. The burgundy blazer was already saturated. Robert could see it in the way the fabric moved. Heavy now, clinging, holding the water like a sponge holds water. Completely, quietly, without complaint. Her hair, pulled tight into its bun, had begun gathering rain at the nape of her neck, sending dark rivulets toward her collar. Her running shoes, visible each time she stepped off a curb, made no sound that reached the interior of the sedan. But Robert had worn enough cheap footwear in his own early years to know exactly what they sounded like. That specific, rhythmic squelch. The sound of fabric that had long since stopped being waterproof doing its inadequate best. She did not look down at her feet. She did not look back. Her eyes stayed level, tracking the road ahead with the focused, energy-conserving gaze of someone who understood that attention spent on discomfort behind you was attention stolen from the distance in front. Robert watched her navigate a narrowed stretch of sidewalk beside a line of parked commercial vans, adjusting without slowing, keeping the bag pressed against her chest throughout, emerging on the other side without breaking stride by a single beat. He noted it, said nothing. He was waiting for the phone to appear. It always appeared by the second mile, the instinctive reach toward the rideshare app, the quiet negotiation between discomfort and resolve that inevitably, in Robert's experience, resolved in discomfort's favor. Jennifer's hand had not left the strap of that bag once. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the heater hummed. And somewhere in the space between those two realities, separated by inches of insulated glass and 30 years of accumulated armor, something shifted in Robert Gray that he was not yet prepared to examine. He looked back at her file. Then he looked back at her. He could not say which one told him less. It happened at the 3-mile mark, on a stretch of Decker Boulevard where the road widened and the storefronts gave way to a long, exposed run of sidewalk with nothing overhead. No trees, no awnings, no architectural mercy of any kind. Robert had been watching the rhythm of her walk for 41 minutes. He knew the number precisely because he had checked his watch when she turned off Monroe Road and had not checked it since, which meant the figure had arrived through the quiet accumulation of attention rather than conscious tracking. 41 minutes, the same pace she had maintained from the first block off Caldwell Street. Not the pace of someone enduring something, the pace of someone finishing it. He was scrolling the secondary section of her file when Marcus's voice came from the front. "Sir," one word, waited enough that Robert looked up immediately. A silver sedan had slowed on Decker Boulevard, pulling toward the curb 15 yards ahead of Jennifer. Hazard lights on, passenger window descending. A private citizen. The kind of person who had seen something through their windshield that their conscience would not allow them to simply pass. Robert set his phone face down on the seat. He leaned forward and watched. He couldn't hear the exchange through 2 layers of insulated glass, but he had observed enough human interaction to read the scene without audio. The driver, a woman, middle-aged, had her head turned toward the open window. Her posture said offer. Her hazard lights said, I mean it. Jennifer had stopped walking. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Here it was, the fulcrum point, the moment every assessment eventually reached, where the body's honest needs began negotiating loudly with the mind's resolve. He had watched 11 candidates arrive at versions of this across his many years. Some flagged down their own escapes. Some simply slowed, pulled out their phones, and quietly surrendered to rideshare arithmetic. He watched Jennifer make her calculation. She took one step toward the silver car, then stopped, shifted the bag against her chest, and shook her head. Not abruptly, not with the performative firmness of someone aware of an audience. Quietly, the headshake of a decision that was never seriously in doubt, delivered with the full-body stillness of a woman who had already done the internal accounting long before the offer arrived. She said something brief. Whatever it was came with a genuine half-smile, the expression of a person grateful for something they have already decided they cannot accept. The hazard lights held for 4 more seconds. Then the window rose. The silver car pulled away. Jennifer turned back to the road and resumed walking at exactly the pace she had stopped. Robert sat back. He told himself this was data. A new variable requiring recalibration. He reached for his phone with the practiced automaticity of a man who processed discomfort by converting it immediately into analysis. He did not pick it up, because something had moved through the insulated glass and the climate-controlled air, and 8 years of carefully constructed distance, and it arrived without asking permission. It arrived as a memory, 30 years old, specific and uninvited. He had been 22. January, not November, which meant ice rather than rain, the kind that formed overnight and made every step a negotiation. Their only car, a '94 Civic with a failing transmission, had finally surrendered the night before his mother's early shift. He had heard her in the kitchen at 4:30 a.m., the particular stillness of a woman doing arithmetic when the numbers don't add up. She had been at the table in her work coat, looking at the car keys in her hand the way you look at something that has stopped being useful. "The plant's 12 miles, she had said. "I'll cut through Albemarle Road." He had told her she couldn't walk 12 miles in January. She had looked at him with a patience that was almost gentle. "If I don't show up, we lose the shift. If we lose the shift, we lose the week." "I know the math, Robert. Do you?" She had kissed his forehead and walked out into the ice. Jennifer Thomas, on a rain-soaked stretch of Decker Boulevard, had just applied that same pressure to a door Robert had spent 30 years welding shut, and something behind it had moved. Marcus's voice arrived carefully from the front seat. "Sir, should I pull up? We could—" "No." The word came out harder than intended. Robert did not walk it back. "Maintain the distance. Don't change anything." A pause. "Yes, sir." Robert did not look at the rearview mirror. He did not want to see his own face in it at this particular moment. Whatever was currently occupying his expression had no professional category, and he was not prepared to account for it. He looked back at the road instead, at the dark burgundy figure moving steadily through the rain ahead, at the same pace, with the same grip, as though the offer and the refusal, and 30 years of someone else's memory, had occurred to a woman the world needed to reckon with. Not break, reckon with. The fortress wall had not collapsed, but the splinter was in. The intersection at Independence Boulevard offered nothing in the way of mercy. 4 lanes of commercial traffic meeting a 2-lane feeder road, creating a wide concrete expanse with no shelter, no narrowing, no architectural accident that might have broken the wind. Rainwater pooled at the crossing edges in broad, shallow lakes with nowhere to drain. The signal cycle was long. The exposure was total. Jennifer reached it at the 4-mile mark and waited for the light. Robert watched from 2 blocks back, his phone untouched, her file forgotten on the seat beside him. She had been walking for 58 minutes without deviation. Same pace, same grip, same forward gaze. He had stopped trying to convert what he was observing into assessment language somewhere around the 3rd mile. The language kept failing. The light changed. She stepped off the curb. The truck came from the north. A commercial delivery vehicle moving at full road speed, its tires tracking the outer curb lane directly through a 20-foot accumulation of storm runoff, 8 inches deep, the color of wet concrete, fed by 4 hours of blocked drainage and sustained rain. Robert saw the puddle before the truck reached it. He saw the trajectory. He saw the distance. He saw that there was nothing between the wall of water and the woman crossing the intersection. The truck did not slow. The displacement was instantaneous. A massive lateral wave, dark, freezing, carrying the accumulated sediment of weeks of dry pavement, rose from the impact and crossed the 6 feet between the curb and Jennifer Thomas before she could register it was coming. It hit her from the left side, neck to ankle, all at once. She stopped, not a stumble, a complete, full-stop cessation of forward motion, as though every system in her body had received the same signal simultaneously and answered with the only honest response available. She stood at the center of the crossing, completely drenched. The burgundy blazer painted flat against her frame, her trousers black with water from the hip down, rain running from her bun in a steady stream. Her face turned slightly downward, not in defeat, but the involuntary response of skin meeting something cold enough to feel like impact. Robert had stopped breathing. He became aware of this when Marcus shifted in the front seat, and the small movement returned him to the interior of the car. The warmth, the cedar, the 72 degrees, and he found his palm pressed flat against the window glass. 3 seconds. He counted them the way he counted everything. Precisely, without mercy. 1, 2, 3. What lived inside those 3 seconds was not visible from 2 blocks away. But it was real, and it was crushing, and Jennifer Thomas carried every ounce of its weight alone in the middle of an intersection on Independence Boulevard. 74 applications. She knew the exact number because she had maintained the spreadsheet herself. Column 1, company name. Column 2, date submitted. Column 3, response received. Column 3 was nearly empty. 11 responses across 14 months. 4 automated rejections. 1 offer she had declined because $14.80 an hour without benefits was a longer version of drowning, and declining it was the only act of faith she had left to offer toward something better. The eviction, not the paperwork. The paperwork she had managed. The morning the notice arrived, Maya asleep in the next room, the 45 seconds she stood in the hallway before opening it, deciding what kind of person she was going to be about this. She had decided to be the kind who opened envelopes. She had been deciding, every morning since, to be the kind who kept going. Is this the time you stop? She opened the bag. Numb fingers. 2 attempts at the zipper. She worked it without rushing, with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something important below their reliable physical threshold. The portfolio was dry, every page, and beneath it, folded once, pressed flat against the plastic lining, a piece of spiral notebook paper in the handwriting of a 7-year-old. Mama, you going to get it, I know, because you never stop. Love, Maya. She held it for 1 second, folded it back, closed the bag. Then she said it, quietly, just above the register of the rain, to the only audience available. If I stop, nothing changes. If I keep walking, maybe everything does. She straightened her shoulders, reset her grip, fixed her eyes on the glass towers of uptown Charlotte, closer now, real now, and stepped forward. 2 blocks behind her, inside the black sedan that had followed her in silence across 4 miles of freezing city, Robert Gray watched her go. He did not reach for his phone. He did not open her file. He did not speak. He simply watched the dark burgundy figure step off the far curb and continue east. Same pace, same grip, same forward gaze. As though the truck and the wave and the 3 seconds and the full accumulated weight of 14 months had occurred to someone the world needed to reckon with. Not break, reckon with. She saw the building 4 blocks out. 14 stories of glass and steel rising from the Charlotte streetscape with the quiet authority of something that had never considered being overlooked. The company name mounted in brushed steel above the entrance. The facade catching the flat November light and redistributing it in pale strips across the wet pavement below. Jennifer did not slow down. She did not speed up either. She carried the same pace across the final 4 blocks that she had carried for 5 miles and 51 minutes. Forward, level, the bag pressed against her chest, eyes on the destination rather than the distance remaining. She was not thinking about the building's architecture. She was thinking about the ground floor restroom she had confirmed existed during a research call 2 days prior. The dry heels in the bag, whether the blazer, once wrung out over a sink, would recover enough structure to pass at close range. She was thinking about what she would say when they asked about the 14 months. She reached the entrance plaza at 8:51 a.m., 9 minutes early. The plaza was broad, dark granite, 30 feet of open exposure between the sidewalk and the revolving doors, with 2 rows of ornamental trees whose bare November branches offered nothing in the way of shelter. Rain crossed it unimpeded, driving against the glass facade and pooling at the center where the drainage had long since surrendered. Jennifer crossed it without hesitating. She was aware, in the abstract way a person becomes aware of their own condition after an hour of overriding it, of what she looked like. The blazer had surrendered its structure somewhere around mile 3 and now clung to her frame, heavy and dark, its shape a memory of the garment it had been. At 6:51 that morning, her trousers were cold against her legs with each step. The bun had held. She had pinned it with enough precision to survive considerably more than this, but it wore the morning's full accumulation without apology. Her running shoes hit the granite with the flat, deliberate sound of something that had covered the necessary distance and arrived at the necessary place. She was 3 yards from the revolving door. She shifted the bag one final time against her chest. emotion so practiced now it had lost all self-consciousness, and reached for the door. The sedan reached the curb at that exact moment. Not fast, not dramatically. It arrived the way it had moved for the past hour and 15 minutes. Slow, deliberate, with the unhurried precision of a vehicle that had never needed to hurry. Marcus brought it to the curb with 12 inches of clearance from the plaza's edge and put it in park. He did not speak. In the rear seat, Robert Gray had not moved for the last 4 blocks. He had watched Jennifer cross the final stretch of sidewalk with the same fixed attention he had maintained for 73 minutes. But somewhere in the last half mile, the quality of that attention had changed, had shifted from the clinical watchfulness of an assessor into something that lived in the chest rather than the mind. Something without a professional category. He watched her reach the door. He watched her shift the bag one last time. And then Robert Gray, a man who had not acted on impulse in 8 years, because impulse was what you felt before you understood it could not be trusted, pressed the button for the rear passenger window. The glass descended with a soft mechanical hiss. The rain entered immediately. Full temperature, full force, no negotiation. It reached Robert's face and the open collar of his charcoal suit in a cold that was total and immediate. He leaned forward into it. Jennifer. She stopped. The voice reached her a half-second before the meaning did. Male. Direct, cutting through the white noise of the downpour with a clarity that did not belong to the ambient sounds of a downtown street. Not a car horn. Not a stranger. A voice that already knew her name. She turned her head. The black sedan sat at the curb 3 feet away, its rear window fully open, rain falling freely through the gap. Framed in that opening, leaning forward, forearms on the door's edge, charcoal suit darkening at the shoulders, where the rain was already reaching him, was a face she recognized instantly from 3 profiles, 2 recorded appearances, and an annual report she had read closely enough to form opinions about. Robert Gray. The realization did not arrive gently. It arrived the way significant things arrive after being withheld, all at once, carrying everything the withholding had obscured. The 6 miles, the 38-degree wind, the truck, the 3 seconds. Maya's note, the $6.40. Every single step of a morning she had walked through in the absolute certainty that no one was watching. None of it had been invisible. He had seen all of it. She stood completely still in the rain, hand on the revolving door, and looked at him. Her face did not rearrange itself into anything managed or performed. There was no time for that, and she would not have done it anyway. What Robert Gray saw from 3 feet away through an open window in the rain was the unguarded expression of a woman absorbing a truth that would take longer than this moment to fully process. He held her gaze. Up close, stripped of the 2-block buffer and the insulated glass and the clinical distance his methodology had always provided, there was nothing left of the comfortable remove he had maintained for 73 minutes. She was 3 feet away, soaking wet, shivering, a visible involuntary tremor in her shoulders she was not attempting to suppress, because suppressing it would have cost energy she was allocating elsewhere. Her chin was level. Her grip on the bag had not changed. She was 9 minutes early. Robert Gray, for the first time in longer than he could accurately account for, found that the language he trusted had nothing useful to offer him. What came out was the only thing that was true. Go inside. Quieter than his boardroom register. Rougher at the edges than he would normally permit. Get warm. I'll meet you upstairs. Jennifer looked at him for one more second. Then she nodded, once with the same clean economy she had applied to everything else this morning, turned back to the revolving door, and pushed through it. Robert watched the door complete its rotation. The rain continued through the open window, reaching the leather beside him, cold against his face and hands. He did not close it immediately. He sat in the rain for a moment that required no professional category, looking at the space where she had been standing. Then, quietly, Marcus, take us around. The window rose. The warmth returned. But the man in the back seat was not the same man who had told his driver to cut the engine on Caldwell Street and simply watch. Something had been permanently rearranged. She made it to the doors, soaking wet, shaking, 9 minutes early, and just before she stepped inside, a window rolled down. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. Like this video if you're already invested. Subscribe because the chapters ahead will wreck you in the best possible way. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every single one. Stay with me. The ground floor restroom was single occupancy. Jennifer locked the door, set the bag on the dry end of the counter, and stood for exactly 3 seconds looking at her reflection. Not with grief. Not with the ambush of self-consciousness that finds a person after something difficult. Just assessment, the same clear-eyed inventory she had applied to the November sky from the top of the Caldwell Street staircase 2 hours and 21 minutes ago. The blazer was the primary problem. Everything else was manageable. She peeled it off first, the saturated fabric releasing with the reluctance of something that had formed an opinion about staying. She wrung it over the sink in 2 stages, body first, then each sleeve, with the methodical efficiency of a woman extracting maximum result from available resources. The water ran dark. She wrung it a second time until what came out was closer to clear, then hung it on the door hook where the air could reach it while she worked. The heels came out of the bag dry, exactly as packed. She changed out of the running shoes and set them aside with the quiet respect owed to something that had done its job across 6 miles without complaint. The blazer had recovered better than expected. 2 minutes of air had allowed the fabric structure to partially reassert itself. She put it back on. Damp at the seams, still darker than its original color, visibly imperfect to anyone paying close attention, she buttoned it, smoothed the lapels, squared the shoulders, then she reached into the bag and took out Maya's note. Read it once, not because she needed to, but because some things deserve to be read rather than merely recalled. Folded it back along its original crease and tucked it into the inside pocket of the blazer, directly over her sternum, where she could feel the slight pressure of it throughout whatever happened next. One breath. She unlocked the door. The 4th floor waiting room had been designed to communicate authority before a word was spoken. Dark wood, low, expensive furniture, recessed lighting that was warm without being welcoming. 3 other candidates were already seated, 2 men and a woman, all dry, all carrying the composed ease of people for whom the morning had been an inconvenience rather than a gauntlet. Their folders were crisp, their expressions were calibrated. They had walked 12 feet from a rideshare to a lobby, and the weather had not registered as anything requiring management. Jennifer sat in the remaining chair and looked straight ahead. 40 seconds of silence. Rough commute, the man seated diagonally across. Early 40s, well-cut suit, the easy delivery of someone saying something pointed without being accountable for its precision, was looking at her blazer with an expression of polite concern that did not reach his eyes. Jennifer looked at him directly, not with hostility, not with the effortful composure of someone suppressing a genuine reaction, with the particular quality of attention belonging to a person who had already been through something real this morning and found, on the far side of it, that this registered at approximately 0 on the scale of things requiring a response. She said nothing, held his gaze for one measured beat, long enough to be deliberate, brief enough to be final, then returned her attention to the middle distance with the unhurried authority of someone who had simply moved on. He did not try again. 3 minutes later, the receptionist called her name. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the 4th floor, 2 full walls of rain-streaked glass overlooking the intersection where, 70 minutes ago, Jennifer had stood for 3 seconds in a wave of freezing water and decided to keep walking. She did not look at that intersection when she entered. She looked at the table. 6 people. She had researched them all. The one she needed to read immediately was Thomas Caldwell, VP of Operations. 51 years old, 22 years with the company, the bearing of a man who had made his decision before the meeting began and was present primarily to confirm it. Robert Gray was not in the room. Jennifer sat down, placed her portfolio on the table with both hands, and looked at the committee. Caldwell did not offer pleasantries. Ms. Thomas, 14 months, walk us through the gap. Jennifer opened her portfolio, not because she needed it, but because arriving with documentation, rather than explanation, established the terms of the conversation before a word was spoken. I'd be glad to. She looked at Caldwell directly. For 14 months, I managed a household operating on 0 fixed income, coordinating emergency housing relocation under a 60-day displacement order, maintaining uninterrupted childcare continuity across 3 transitional arrangements, and navigating state medical assistance applications across 4 separate agency systems, each with distinct documentation requirements and compliance timelines. She let that sit for 2 seconds. I was also tracking 74 job applications simultaneously, maintaining version-controlled records of each submission, follow-up timeline, and outcome. The tracking methodology is in the appendix if you'd like to review it. Caldwell's expression held. But something in the room had shifted, the atmospheric recalibration of a conversation departing from its anticipated architecture. Creative framing, he said, and the word creative carried the full weight of his skepticism without the inconvenience of stating it plainly. This role manages high-pressure global distribution timelines. Personal circumstance isn't a direct translation. With respect, Jennifer said, no heat, only the steady temperature of a person who had prepared for exactly this moment. The translation is precise. Emergency relocation under a 60-day order is compressed logistics with hard deadlines and zero contingency budget. Managing childcare continuity across multiple providers is network coordination under variable capacity constraints. Tracking 74 concurrent applications is pipeline management. She paused. I wasn't absent from logistics for 14 months, Mr. Caldwell. I was running the most complex, lowest resource supply chain operation of my career. The difference is that the cargo was my daughter's stability, and there was no tolerance for a missed delivery. The room was quiet. The HR director had stopped writing. Caldwell opened his mouth. The boardroom door opened. Robert Gray did not adjust a room upon entering it. He simply appeared, and the room reorganized itself around his presence, with the automatic efficiency of a system encountering a variable it had always been designed to accommodate. He walked to the head of the table, did not sit, and looked at the committee with the expression of a man who had made a decision and arrived to deliver it. His shoulders were still damp. He picked up her file, looked at it once, set it back down. I'll be brief. His voice carried the same quality it had through the open car window, quieter than its authority required, rougher at the edges than his professional register usually permitted. I am not extending an offer out of corporate pity. I am hiring her because she conquered a 6-mile flash flood, arrived early, kept her materials immaculate, and refused to let an unforgiving world break her resolve. He looked at Caldwell with the directness of a man who had stopped moderating himself somewhere between Independence Boulevard and this room. That isn't a lack of qualifications, gentlemen. That is absolute operational excellence. No one at the table spoke. Robert pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. Now, he looked at Jennifer with the focused attention of a man conducting a meeting he intended to conclude efficiently. Tell me about the Piedmont corridor. I understand you have thoughts. Jennifer turned to page 3 of her portfolio and began. The offer letter arrived at 4:47 p.m. On the same Tuesday, she had walked 6 miles through the rain to earn it. Jennifer read it twice in the lobby before she allowed herself to feel anything about it. Then she sat down in one of the charcoal chairs, the expensive permanence of them, and read it a third time. Not because she didn't understand it, because some things deserved more than a single reading. She called Maya from the lobby. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and contained, on Maya's end, a volume of enthusiasm that caused the front desk receptionist to look up briefly and then look away, with the discretion of someone who had witnessed something private and chosen to respect it. Jennifer kept her voice level throughout. She did not cry until she was 3 blocks away, walking toward the bus stop in the rain. Then she walked the rest of the way and went home. She reported 11 days later, in a pressed white blouse and the dry-cleaned burgundy blazer, to a desk on the 3rd floor in the Open Plan Operations Coordination area. Her corridor assignment was Southeast Regional, 6 states, 32 active distribution routes, enough daily freight movement to keep 3 coordinators fully occupied. By the end of her first week, she was handling the volume of 1.5. This was not by instruction. It was the natural consequence of the fact that Jennifer processed logistics documentation the way some people processed language, quickly, accurately, with an instinctive pattern recognition that located anomalies in routing data at a speed her system-trained colleagues had never needed to develop. They had learned the work from the inside out. She had learned it from the outside. Across 14 months of managing scarcity with no margin for error, and the skill transferred with a directness that surprised everyone except the man on the 9th floor who had watched her walk 4 miles through a freezing city before making his decision. The whispers began in the second week. She heard them the way you hear things in open-plan offices, not directly, but as a texture in the ambient noise. CEO's project, twice. Charity case once, from a direction she chose not to identify, because identifying it would have required a response, and a response would have cost energy she was allocating to the work. She said nothing, arrived early, made no errors, built the record block by block the way she knew how, because she understood, with bone-deep clarity, that the only available answer to a whisper was work, not louder work, not performed work, just the steady, daily accumulation of a record that eventually became too substantial to talk around. The routing anomaly appeared on a Thursday morning in her third week, in a quarterly variance report she had not been assigned to review. She had pulled it from the shared drive the previous evening, out of the same instinct that had produced her interview portfolio, the conviction that understanding a system's full geography was not optional for someone who intended to operate within it responsibly. The Piedmont Shipping Corridor's transit time estimates ran on static seasonal averages, fixed figures built from historical data, assuming winter conditions would approximate the mean of the previous 5 years. Reasonable, if winter weather was consistent. It was not consistent. Anyone who had spent a November morning walking through a Charlotte flash flood while a routing system continued calculating dry road arrival windows would have found this immediately self-evident. When actual conditions exceeded the static average, which they had, in 6 of the previous 12 measured winter months, the algorithm kept generating transit commitments that the weather made impossible. Carriers missed windows, penalty clauses activated. The variance report filed the resulting costs under seasonal fluctuation and moved on. Jennifer sat with the figures for the rest of that evening. By 6:30 the following morning, she had a 4-page proposal at the kitchen table, written after Maya was in bed. It recommended replacing the static average with a dynamic adjustment model, pulling real-time National Weather Service data at 72-hour intervals, recalculating transit windows accordingly, and flagging high-risk commitments for manual review before transmission. She had built a preliminary version of the formula herself, using the existing system architecture, because she wanted the proposal to arrive with a demonstration rather than a concept. She placed it in her supervisor Garrett's inbox at 7:15 a.m. Then she sat down and began her day's work. Garrett forwarded it before noon. By the following Monday, it had reached Thomas Caldwell's desk, moving at a speed that proposals from third-week probationary coordinators did not typically achieve. Caldwell read it twice. Then he walked down 2 floors, something his direct reports would later describe, with varying degrees of astonishment as unprecedented, located Jennifer's workstation, and stood beside it until she looked up. "The formula," he said, without preamble. "You built it in the existing architecture. Modifying the core architecture would have required a 2-week IT review," Jennifer said. "I wanted you to be able to test it immediately." Caldwell looked at her with an expression that was not warm. His expressions were constitutionally resistant to warmth, but carried something that functioned as its operational equivalent. The look of a man revising a position he had held, with confidence, and finding the revision professionally necessary. Validation parameters, page 4. He picked up the copy from the edge of her desk. She had kept one there since Monday, because she had expected this conversation. Looked at page 4, and left without another word. The parallel model ran for 22 days. The results were not ambiguous. Projected against 3 prior winter seasons, the dynamic adjustment model would have prevented 4 major carrier window failures, eliminated 11 penalty clause activations, and reduced seasonal variance costs by $168,000 annually. Conservative, per the finance team's notation, it excluded secondary savings from improved carrier relationship metrics. Caldwell brought Jennifer's permanent contract to her desk personally on a Friday afternoon, rather than routing it through HR. He set it in front of her without explanation. She read every clause, every schedule, every condition, because she had not arrived at this desk by treating any document as a formality. She signed it, returned it. "Thank you," she said. Caldwell nodded once. The spare, undecorated respect of a man who meant precisely what he said and said nothing further. Then he left. Robert Gray received the finance summary that same afternoon. He read the $168,000 figure. He set the document on his desk, and looked at it for a moment that had no professional category and required none. The methodology had produced a result, but this time, for the first time in 8 years, the result had not arrived as confirmation that his cynicism was justified. It had arrived as evidence that someone had been worth trusting. He filed the summary, returned to his work. Outside the 9th floor window, Charlotte moved through its ordinary rhythms, traffic and light and the flat gray of a sky that had not yet decided whether to rain. 2 years is not a long time in the life of a corporation. In the life of a person who spent 14 months trying to get inside one, it is everything. Jennifer Thomas's name appeared on the door of Office 914 on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 2 years, 1 week, and 3 days after she had stood at the entrance of this same building in a soaking burgundy blazer, 9 minutes early, with $6.40 in her account and a daughter's note pressed against her sternum. Jennifer Thomas, Regional Operations Director, Southeast Division. She stood in the hallway and looked at it for a moment on the morning it was installed, not with theatrical emotion, with the private, interior quality of a person doing a quiet accounting, measuring the distance between a specific point in the past and a specific point in the present, not to celebrate the gap, but to confirm it was real. It was real. The apartment she shared with Maya was on the 6th floor of a building in the Noda neighborhood, with tall windows that let morning light in, at an angle that made the kitchen feel larger than it was. Maya had chosen her bedroom wall color herself, a particular shade of green she described, with the precise aesthetic confidence of a 9-year-old, as the color of something good about to happen. Jennifer had painted it on a Saturday afternoon while Maya supervised from the doorway and had not argued with the description. The car was a 3-year-old Navy sedan, reliable and unassuming, with a heater that worked without negotiation. Jennifer drove it through the Charlotte streets she had once walked in the rain, and found, still, on certain November mornings when the sky carried a specific quality of gray, that she noticed the sidewalks differently than she had before that Tuesday 2 years ago. She noticed them the way you notice things that have cost you something. Maya had full medical coverage, dental, vision, a pediatrician who knew her name and her history. Jennifer paid attention to these things the way you pay attention to anything that was once entirely absent. With a gratitude, she had made a conscious decision not to let familiarity soften. She had earned that gratitude. 6 miles of it. The formal announcement of the 6 Miles Initiative arrived company-wide on a Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., carrying Robert Gray's name and, directly beneath it, Jennifer Thomas's. The program had been Robert's idea in origin and Jennifer's in architecture. The accurate description of a 6-month collaborative process that had begun with a conversation in Robert's office on a rainy afternoon and concluded with a 70-page operational framework that HR had received with the careful enthusiasm of people confronting something they could not immediately categorize. The framework was straightforward in intent and deliberate in design. It eliminated the transportation and proximity filters that had historically and invisibly screened out qualified candidates from low-income areas before their applications reached a human reviewer. It provided baseline transit allowances for final-round candidates regardless of distance or method. It established corporate childcare partnerships with 3 metro area providers, and it replaced the standard employment gap assessment with a resilience evaluation framework, one that asked reviewers to consider what a gap represented in full context, rather than what it looked like in isolation. Patricia Hollis, the HR director who had called Robert's sidewalk assessments invasive on 3 formal occasions, co-signed the framework without being asked twice. She had contributed 14 pages of the final document, a fact Robert had noted in the acknowledgments with the precise, unembellished credit of a man who had learned, at significant cost, the value of people who told him things he did not want to hear. The launch was not a ceremony in any elaborate sense. Robert had vetoed the initial proposal, catered reception, podium, curated guest list, in favor of 30 people in a second-floor office, the initiative's staff, HR leadership, 2 board members, and a small number of employees whose own hiring stories the program existed to honor. At the center of the room's primary wall, mounted in a simple dark wood frame, was a single object, a portfolio folder, cream-colored, crisp, unmistakably dry, the one Jennifer had carried inside a plastic-lined leather shoulder bag across 6 miles of freezing November rain, pressed against her body through a truck's wave, and a 3-second stand, and a final 4 blocks of will that had nothing left to run on except the contents of a note from a 7-year-old. She had brought it to Robert's office 6 months ago when the initiative's design was nearly complete, setting it on his desk without explanation. He had looked at it for a long moment and asked if she was certain she wanted it here rather than somewhere private. She had told him that private was where it had already been for 2 years, and that it had done what private things do when they stay private. It had meant everything to her and nothing to anyone it might have helped. He had not argued. Now, during the brief interval between Robert's closing remarks and the room filling back in, Jennifer looked at the frame on the wall. Then she looked at Robert. He was already looking at her. 4 seconds, perhaps 5. No grand acknowledgement, no performed significance. Just the mutual, unambiguous recognition of two people who had been present for something real and understood, without needing to say it, exactly what it had cost and exactly what it had built. Robert gave a single, slight nod. Jennifer returned it. The room continued around them. The work of the morning resumed. Outside the second-floor window, Charlotte moved through its ordinary November rhythms, traffic, light, and a sky that had not yet decided what it intended to do. The storm arrived without the courtesy of a forecast. It had been an ordinary Tuesday morning, gray-skied but manageable, the kind of November weather Charlotte produced routinely enough that most commuters made their peace with it and continued without adjustment. Jennifer had left the apartment at 7:40, kissed Maya goodbye at the door, and navigated the morning school drop conversation that had recently expanded to include Maya's detailed opinions about a science project dispute involving 3 classmates. Jennifer had listened to all of it, offered a measured perspective, and arrived at her car with 4 minutes to spare. She had been on Independence Boulevard for 11 minutes when the sky changed its mind entirely. It came down fast and without transition, not the gradual escalation of an ordinary storm, but the sudden, total commitment of weather that had been holding something back and abruptly stopped. Rain hit the windshield in a volume that reduced visibility to half a block inside 30 seconds. The drainage along Independence Boulevard surrendered quickly, water sheeting across the road surface in the flat, fast-moving way that turned familiar streets into unreliable geography. Jennifer reduced her speed. The heater held its steady warmth. The Navy sedan moved through the rain with the unhurried reliability of a vehicle, chosen specifically because it handled poorly in nothing. She was 2 blocks from the building when she saw her. The young woman was on the left sidewalk, moving east, at a pace that had stopped being a walk and become something closer to a controlled run. The compromised, burning gait of a person pushing through conditions they had not prepared for and could not stop. Dark coat, already past the point of providing meaningful protection. Hair flattened against her face. No umbrella. In her right arm, pressed against her chest with both the grip and the deliberate body angle of someone who had made a conscious decision about what to protect, was a folder, not a bag. A folder, the kind that held documents someone had prepared carefully and needed to arrive intact. She was shielding it with her own body, the same way Jennifer had shielded a leather shoulder bag across 6 miles of this same street, 2 years and 1 week ago, in a rain that had looked almost exactly like this one. Jennifer's foot moved to the brake before the conscious decision arrived. She recognized the folder first, then the posture, then the quality of focus in the young woman's forward gaze. That specific, energy-conserving directness belonging to a person who had accepted the conditions fully and was allocating everything remaining toward the destination. Jennifer knew that gaze. She had worn it for 6 miles. She knew what it cost to maintain and what it meant that this woman was still maintaining it. And she knew, with the immediate clarity of a person encountering something they have personally survived, exactly where that folder was going. She pulled to the curb. She understood Robert's logic. She had understood it since the afternoon he explained the full methodology to her in his office. The betrayal, the formula, the systematic elimination of trust as a variable, because trust had proven, once, to be catastrophically exploitable. She had listened without interruption and understood every step of the architecture. The logic was internally coherent. The desire to observe rather than intervene, to isolate grit from comfort, to see what a person did when the conditions were real and the audience was removed, came from a genuine place. It was not cruelty. It was a wound that had found an operational form. But she also understood what the logic missed. It missed the cost of the aloneness. Not the institutional cost. The qualified candidates lost to invisible filters and employment gap penalties. That cost was real, and the 6 Miles Initiative existed because both of them had reckoned with it fully. The cost she meant was smaller and more specific. The weight of a soaking blazer at the 4-mile mark. The 3 seconds on Independence Boulevard after the truck. The particular, cellular aloneness of a person in difficulty who has no reason to believe that anyone behind the insulated glass has any interest in the outcome. That aloneness was not a test variable. It was a human being in the rain, and the only honest response to a human being in the rain was to stop the car. Jennifer leaned toward the open passenger door. The young woman had not yet registered the sedan at the curb. She was 3 yards past it, still moving, still shielding the folder, when Jennifer spoke. "Hey!" She stopped, turned, assessed the open door with the rapid, involuntary caution a woman alone in a city performs without deciding to, because the world has made it necessary. Jennifer met her eyes directly. No managed warmth, no professional composure, just the level, unhurried gaze of a woman with something true to say. "Get in," she said. "I've been exactly where you are. One more second." Then she got in. Her name was Deja, 23 years old. Entry-level distribution coordinator interview, 4 blocks north, at 9 o'clock. It was currently 8:46. She would make it with time to spare. They did not talk extensively. Jennifer asked 2 questions and listened to the answers fully. Deja asked 1. "Do you work around here?" And Jennifer answered simply, without the full context, because the full context was not what this moment required. What this moment required was the ride. She pulled to the curb in front of Deja's building at 8:49. Deja reached for the door handle, then stopped and turned back, with the slightly unsteady expression of someone on the receiving end of an unexpected kindness, still processing the grammar of it. "Thank you," she said, simple and complete. "Go get it," Jennifer said. Deja stepped out into the rain, folder pressed against her chest, moving toward the entrance with a stride that was no longer the burning gait of someone fighting the weather. Jennifer watched her reach the door. Then she pulled back into traffic and continued south toward her own building, where her name was on a door on the 9th floor, and a framed folder on a 2nd-floor wall held the weight of a morning that had changed the shape of 2 lives simultaneously, one by refusing to be broken, and one by learning, too late and just in time, what it had cost him to watch rather than stop. The ultimate measure of character was not how much suffering you could observe in another person before deciding they had proven themselves worthy. It was simpler than that, harder than that, more human than anything a methodology could capture. It was the willingness to stop the car, to open the door, to say, "I know this road, get in."